Yo, what's up, you guys? This week we're talking about the Apple event. And the reason is because we've seen a lot of information just in 2 days. It happened on the 14th, today is the 16th. And we're talking about it because this is a photography channel. So let's talk about specifics. And for this, since it's a photography channel, I wanted to talk about the iPhone 13 specifically for photographers. The question for this video has already been posed. We're talking about it in the sense of, should you upgrade if you're thinking about it? If you're a photographer and use your iPhone, should you upgrade? So if that interests you, stick around and we'll talk about it. But first, if you haven't already, leave me a comment down below. If you saw a lot of that leak stuff, like we had big leaks this year, let me know right off the bat. What do you think about that? Like leak culture, we saw some of that with some other creators, but let me know in the comments on that. But anything other than that, let's stick around for the video because I have some data for you as far as the iPhone goes between the 12 and the 13. We're going to talk data, and then we're going to talk about my opinion in general as far as like an upgrade and whether you should or shouldn't. So if that interests you, stick around and we'll talk about it. So thanks for sticking around through the intro. We're talking about the Apple event and the iPhone 13 specifically, but even more specifically, we're going to niche down one more step and look at just the camera. And the reason is, like I said, this is a photography channel, so we want to know, should we upgrade based on the camera? There might be a lot of different reasons to upgrade for all those other features, but just the camera basics alone, just the camera essentials, I guess is what we're going to call it for this video, is the reason why we're going to ask the question, should we upgrade? Especially if we have something like the iPhone 12 or 12 mini, 12 Pro, 12 Max, all of those iterations from last year. So for that, I'm going to show you a little bit of data as far as what I've culminated from a couple of the Apple events, whether it's this year or last year's, and just some things that I found out and a couple of things that I think are interesting. Now, I have to lead off with the fact that this data list is not exhaustive. This is not like a whole like set of different things. It's just what I found interesting between the two versions. We're going to like examine the 12 line and the 13 line because those are the two that are closest. Obviously, there's going to be larger jumps if you go 11, 10, or even further back, obviously. So we're going to do the 12 and the 13, but let's look at the hardware specifically, and then I'll give you my answer if you can't already figure it out, whether you should or shouldn't upgrade. Okay, so let's get into it. This is talking about the actual physical camera aspects of both lines. We're talking the iPhone 12, 12 mini, 12 Pro, 12 Pro Max versus the counterparts from this year in the 13 line. So let's start looking at the cameras specifically. I made this little chart basically talking about just the things that I noticed, and this is, like I said, my top 5 kind of thing of differences that really could be of note when you're talking about an upgrade. So the first thing right off the bat is the fact that all cameras across both lines are 12 megapixels. There aren't some that are like a little bit higher and a little bit lower. They're all 12 megapixels, which is a big difference when you're talking about like wide angles, ultra wides, that telephoto. If you're running on 12 megapixels all throughout all the camera systems, it's something to note because you're not getting like a bump up just based on megapixels. If you go with the 13 Pro Max versus if you got the 12 mini or something like that, like both ends of the spectrum here. So you won't see a difference there. All the cameras have a 12 megapixel sensor. Moreover, though, what I thought was really interesting, specifically with a wide angle lens, is the fact that last year's models, all 4 models, their wide angle lens, the lens that automatically opens when you open up that Apple iPhone native phone app, that camera app, is the fact that they all shot at a 1.6 aperture. Now, this is really interesting because it's something that Apple said was their fastest yet. So this is something that's really insane because when you're talking about a 1.6 aperture, that's really fast, especially for something like an iPhone. Now, if this was 1.6 on like a DSLR or mirrorless lens, you know that mirror or that lens is going to cost a lot because of that aperture. It's something that's very wide and gives you a lot of light, which is amazing. Now, what's really interesting with this for the 13 line this year is that the first 2 renditions, the 13 and the mini, are still getting that 1.6 aperture, which was their fastest yet last year. But now this year, they've stepped it up again. So this year, the Pro and the Pro Max for the 13 line are getting a 1.5 aperture, which is insanely fast again, and they just they did it again every year, which is really interesting. But beyond all that, let's talk about the ultra wide as well. Now, when we're talking about the ultra wide specifically this year, what's really interesting in my mind is the apertures again get that same bump. So all 4 renditions of the 12 last year and the 13 and 13 mini from this year, from this event, all shoot at 2.4 aperture. So it's a really fast aperture even for those ultra wides. If you saw an ultra wide again in a mirrorless system or in a DSLR system like a traditional camera, again, that's going to be an expensive lens because it's going to be really fast and it's going to be awesome. But what's even even better than that is, again, the 13 Pro and Pro Max have done the exact same thing as a wide, and Apple has created an even faster aperture for those at 1.8. Now, this means, again, that this is an extremely fast lens, great with sharpness. It's going to be able to be sharper at different points, so it's going to be sharper longer. You're going to be able to get a lot more low light, something, again, they hit on a lot when you're talking about being able to capture stuff. So these are phones that are taken all over the place, so you need to be able to capture like brights, but also darks. So I think the 1.8 is really interesting in the ultra wide as well. But let's talk about the telephoto as our third piece to this question of whether we should or shouldn't upgrade. Now, when it comes to the telephoto, you're getting two big differences between aperture and focal length this year. So 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max last year shot with a 52 millimeter and a 65 millimeter equivalency respectively with an f2.0 aperture. This year, I find it interesting that the Pro and Pro Max of the 13 line are getting an f2.8 aperture with a 77 millimeter equivalency. Now, as far as the difference between the two, like I said, in the 12, I found this to be interesting because it was something that I couldn't nail down for certain. So if you find something different on the internet, let me know. Leave me a comment if you find a difference there. But what I saw was the fact that because the 12 Pro Max is larger, it has a different sensor, or maybe it's a little bit closer or something like that. Obviously, it deals with math and optics and stuff like that, but things that go over my head. But the general gist was because the phone for the 12 Pro Max and the sensor was a little bit different, you're talking about a different focal length. So between that 52 and the 65. But either way, you have essentially a 52 millimeter focal length that's more of like a middle range. It's not quite telephoto in my opinion. And 65 is getting there, but it's more like a middle road. So what I really like about the 13 Pro and Pro Max is the fact that you're getting closer to that true traditional portrait length that I really like when you're talking about a telephoto. So like I use an 85 typically, like an I think it's f1.8. So to get an f2.8 and to get that 77 millimeter equivalency, you're getting really close to what I typically use for a true portrait session, which is amazing. This could be something to get like some behind the scenes stuff, or even get some really good comparisons between cameras. Or is a camera really getting close to a DSLR or mirrorless system? Like I bet we'll see a ton of those videos, but I think it's really interesting that we got like two differences between the telephoto between the two generations this year. But let me talk to you a little bit, one more thing about the wide angle that I find probably the most interesting when you're talking about these lenses and this camera system. Now, for everyone counting, I think this is number 5 when we're talking about my top things that I found interesting as far as the camera systems for the new iPhone lineup. But we have to go back to the wide because I think this is like the main camera, so it's one that I want to hit on because it is really interesting. So in the wide angle, the main camera, well, again, when you open up the iPhone, this is the one that it gives you as far as right off the bat, right? So you got that aperture bump in the 12 Pro and the 12 Max between the 13 and the 12. So you went from that 1.6 to 1.5 in the 13, which is really great. But beyond that, you actually get a bigger sensor as well. So in the 12 line, but for the Pro line at least, you got a 1.7 micron size sensor. In the 13 Pro and Max, their counterparts this year, you get a 1.9 micron size sensor, which means it's going to be sharper, it's going to be more, it's going to have better detail, it's going to have better low light capability, just generally better in a lot of different ways. Now, it might be an incremental kind of betterness, I guess, if you want to say that, because it's 1.7 to 1.9, and that's not a big number, but generally speaking, between all of those things and what I'm about to tell you, is going to be a reason why you should definitely consider the upgrade. So let's talk about a couple of the features that I wasn't able to mention inside just the camera hardware itself. Okay, so now that we move beyond the hardware side of it, we can talk about the internal aspects of just the phone itself that I think are really going to help you when you're talking about content or photo creation, things for photographers that really make sense. Beyond just hardware, I think the internals like the A15 Bionic chip are going to make it more efficient. It's going to make it better battery life. They talked about stuff like that, obviously, but more efficient, more powerful, give you the ability to do things that you couldn't before and be able to do them faster. So something they also showed that I thought was really interesting was the photographic styles. Now, this is a feature that will eventually, obviously, probably trickle down to the other ones. But right off the bat, I think it's going to be better in the 13 Pro and Max, and probably in the 13 line in general, compared to the previous lines, because you have that bump up in like CPU, GPU, which they talked about. But initially with photographic styles, which is really interesting, is the fact that you're essentially editing the photo while taking it. So there's a lot to do with the fact that roadmap, they basically showed the breakdown of a photo and all the different layers that your phone is basically processing all at the same time through the image image processing solution module thing. So basically the way they explain it is like with image processing, it comes through the lens of the camera and into the sensor, into the ISP, which is that image processing module, into the GPU, into the CPU, and then back to the GPU finally to actually show you the image. So there's a lot going on. So it gives you that roadmap. But with photographic styles, which is really interesting, is the fact that you're getting to implement kind of like an edit your style in the midst of that process, which is the way I understood it. And I think it's really interesting because it's kind of giving you that Lightroom ability while taking the photo. So it might cut down a lot on post-processing because you're kind of pre-processing, which is really interesting. But beyond that, if you're like a photo guy or a video guy, and I haven't really talked about video as much, the cinematic mode might be the reason, in my opinion, to upgrade to the pro models this year, because of being able to do things like you take a video and then essentially can adjust focus and bokeh after the fact. So you take your video, and normally if you take it, whatever you have is whatever you have. But with this new mode, it's basically, again, making that roadmap. It's making a video, a file, where you're able to adjust things after the fact. This is something they showed as far as a couple of the clips where they were changing from focus point here to focus point here. It's essentially rack focusing, which we're very familiar with in movies and stuff. But be able to do it on a phone is interesting. But be able to do it after the fact, after it's been shot, is killer. Now, that doesn't even talk about other things. Like I mentioned the GPU, CPU bump, but there's obviously like a 4-core to 6-core GPU or whatever, that bump. That's amazing, right? The internals of the actual phone. Beyond that, you also get Apple ProRes, which is going to be amazing. You get it 4K ProRes. Now, one of the things that I've seen mentioned is the fact that you are going to need that terabyte phone or maybe the 512, because that's going to be a lot of like data itself. So something to think about there. So you might not be able to get away with the 128 version. You might have to bump it up again, which is obviously going to cost more. But when you're talking about like feature wise, it's an amazing feature, especially for a phone. Other than that, I think the last thing to mention is the macro photography for photography people like myself, and the fact that you're going to be able, with that ultra wide or with the wide, I believe, get a macro photography capability. So you can get down to 2 centimeters, which is really interesting. This is just another feature to think about an upgrade for. Okay, so now there's a part on my opinion. Now, when we're talking about my opinion, it is purely just that you do what you want to do as far as like whether you're going to spend that $1,000 plus on a new phone. And I can honestly agree that it is super expensive when you're talking about a cell phone nowadays. But for the price that you're getting and the capabilities that you're getting, my opinion is that it's probably worth an upgrade, even from the 12 Pro and Pro Max line, purely because you're getting a lot of features and a lot of hardware adjustments to go along with those features. Now, like I said, the features are going to trickle down. It happens every year. And even some of those things as far as hardware are going to trickle down. That 1.5 is probably going to make it into the lower lines, like the 14 and 14 mini next year, or the S line, whatever you want to call it. I think that'll trickle down because that happens all the time. We see that a lot with Apple. Like they start on the high end and then it makes its way into the lower end, which is great for consumers. But if you want to be truly wowed, I think this year you have to go all out. I think where the money is at and where like the capabilities are is in the Pro line, and that makes a lot of sense because that's where they've spent a lot of time trying to give you, or you as a pro, is whether you're a photographer, a videographer, a content creator for YouTube or TikTok or whoever. I think this is where you should land because, yeah, it's an expensive phone, but honestly, there is so much like just baked into that phone that is going to be incredible for content creation, especially for things on the fly. One example that I like to give is the fact that I shoot so much content on my phone now with TikTok because TikTok has like gotten so big that for this kind of stuff where I'm able to like sit down and set up lights and set up a camera and all that stuff for YouTube, it looks really good. But TikTok is completely different. It's a whole other animal in the fact that it's very raw, it's very uncut, it's very like on the fly. And being able to do those things from your mobile device, which is portable, essentially in your pocket, basically in your pocket, right? Literally in your pocket. And then on top of that, you have the ability to do all of those different things with ProRes, or be able to do those things with the cinematic mode and create a movie, something that is truly interesting that could really be used anywhere. I think is definitely worth an upgrade. Let me know what you think, though. I think this is the time. If you haven't already, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Are you going to upgrade? Are you not going to upgrade? Give me some counterpoints if you want to as to why you think maybe I don't want to upgrade, or maybe you don't want to upgrade. Let me know all of that in the comments. And also, if you haven't already, I hope you'll hit that like button down below, hit that little thumbs up, let me know that you like this content, that you like this kind of style, that you like just the general topic. That way I know to make more of it. And if you haven't already also, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button because you like photography and you like this stuff and you want to talk about it more, because I have a ton more content back on the channel that you need to go check out. If you stick around the video, I'll have an end screen that'll have a couple more videos you can check out straight from there. But honestly, I hope you will hit that like button, I hope you will comment, I hope you will subscribe, and let me know that you liked all this and want to see some more of it. And with that, I'm going to hit you with my typical, and I will peace out for now. I will see you in the next one. Let me know all those things. Make sure you go down to that comment box right now and let me know some comments. Don't leave without leaving me a comment. But yeah, I'm going to peace out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See you.